Positype presents Long Distance Design, Collaborative and Iterative Type Design at Positype by Neil Summerour and Potch Auacherdkul.
I am Neil Summerour.
I'm Potch Auacherdkul.
We were told this is supposed to be casual and lighthearted. So with our presentation, we decided to kind of take the approach of, one, talk about how the weirdo, that's me, finally brought somebody else on, and why, and kind of the thought process behind it, because everybody is a little different, every studio is a little different. So I thought, okay, this is probably lighthearted. So we're going to be showing a lot of work, we're going to be talking about our process, but we're not going to take ourselves very seriously, and we're not going to get overly detailed. If you know me, you know I'm a little sarcastic. So I'm going to try not to say anything too stupid, maybe. So we're going to kind of start off, I'll give a little backstory, mostly not for my own ego, but to kind of frame things so you kind of understand where I'm coming from. 1996, I was young. Before I realized that type was going to be the path that I took, I ended up designing a typeface. Didn't know that I was really designing. I didn't know that that was what you called it. I was still in college. And that would kind of translate to things later. And 2000 February, I decided to design typefaces because some graphic designers are jerks. And I do mean this, and I'm not going to call out the famous graphic designer that I sat in on a talk only to realize this guy is an ass. I literally left saying to myself, if this guy can do it, I can do it a lot better. Crazy bravado, but at the same time, okay. By that point, a few months later, I actually came up with the name Positype because I didn't think anybody could say Summerour or remember it or spell it. And for those that have asked over the years, it is kind of a combination of positive type. And then later that year, I published my first typeface at T26. Thank you, Carlos Segura. Now, I framed this that way because this was 2000. This was before Instagram. This was before practical social media. This was before workshops online. This was before really decent software to design type. Thank you, Glyphs. So you start out in a void, not knowing where you are. And I live in the southern United States. I'm not in a large creative center. So you have to start taking on an approach of self-sufficiency and problem solving. And I'm a bit of a nerd, so I tried to figure out what my process would be, and essentially held to that, and it slowly evolved over time. And again, 2000, and I really didn't consider myself a foundry until 2009. Everything I was doing, I considered it a hobby and an exploration, and the only way to get feedback and the only way to see how people responded to the work I was doing was publish. We didn't have what we have now, which I wish I had. Now, why so long, 2000 to 2009? Honestly, respect for the craft. No social media, no online classes, no workshops, no repositories or technology of wisdom meant you just kind of had to figure it out. And for those elderly type creatives, I started on Fontographer and had my hand in Icarus as well, so I handled the puck. And if you don't know what that means, later. Now, so that I could move on and hopefully try to make something of what was something that was very passionate, the idea of designing type, I had to come up with an approach. And Simon was referencing something the other day, and we kind of laughed. For me to kind of start a process internally in my studio, I kind of applied approaches of Kaizen, which is basically constant improvement. And I tried to develop an iterative approach, as it were, related to type. So quickly, you look at the idea of improving your craft. What can be improved? Identify it, research, learn, solution, test, iterate, and improve on that. Once you find something that you consider successful, you adopt it, and then you move to the next aspect. For type design, this is the process that I followed then and the process I still follow. Idea for a typeface. Identify the need and establish if there is one. Research and learn. Make sure that I am looking at other examples, that I'm not copying, which is a very important aspect for me. Then begin to draw exemplars. And what I mean by that is actually draw, not sit in the computer, draw, paper, pencil. And I share those every once in a while on social media because, hey, now we have it. Critique, explore, iterate, and then at some point go into production and then move on to the next typeface. I pause because actually you get into a causal loop when you're designing type because you may draw exemplars, you may critique, you may, iterate, but then you realize it takes more time. So you give that time and you start that loop back to drawing exemplars and continuing to refine. Recap. Take time to improve. Progress is continuous and each iteration is a milestone. Even when I think it sucks, I'm satisfied with that because that's giving me more information to go forward. Example of that really quickly. There was a typeface that early in my career I produced called Donatora. I think I kept it live for about 3.5 months, and then I pulled it from every distributor. And the reason was, there was something better. There was something beautiful. And I was early and young and not confident in what I was producing. But I said, okay, I'm going to take this down. I didn't pick it back up until, 20 years later. And for reference, when I released this typeface, it was about 2 months later, I get a printed specimen in the mail from Emigre, and I learn of Philosophia by Susanna Lichko. And I was mortified. As a young type designer, I was like, I don't need to do this. This doesn't need to be out there. There's something better. I wasn't confident. I pulled it. And it wasn't until 20 years later that I actually picked it back up. And at this point, Potch was involved. So it was working through that process and then iterating past what I considered ugly to the stuff that actually has merit. And this is one iteration after the other over a period of what? 6 months?
I think so.
Yeah, 6 months. Yeah, or longer. Potch knows with me, I don't put a timeline on a typeface. If it takes longer, it takes longer. I don't care. What's the thing? Oh, and I have it in here. It's better right than rushed. So, and we get to the fun stuff. Potch. 2017, March, I get an email from Potch, basically wanting to intern. First thing ran through my mind, I had, at this point, always worked alone. Not for ego, not for pomposity. It was because there wasn't anybody around, especially where I lived. So I was kind of by myself. And I did not feel like I would be a competent teacher. And just as much as you might take on an intern, considering that I've taught at the university level, it's a responsibility. And I didn't know if I was good enough or I was at a point where I thought I could mentor somebody. After going through all of those aspects of not feeling like I'm qualified, that I live in Georgia, yay rednecks. Initially, I was like, I can't teach Potch anything. This works pretty good. I can't teach him anything. And then those voices change and you start going, well, all right, maybe I can. I see stuff. But I did try to discourage Potch. I explained I'm living in Georgia and it is not very urban. There's really no place to go and eat and it's not that fun. I explained, I'm going to be traveling. That wasn't a lie. I was going to be traveling. But he emailed again. And again. And ultimately I said, hey, this guy's got talent and I think I can do this. Before we started, I tried to take the same iterative approach that I had been doing for years and see if there was a way that I could apply it to him, because I work very fluidly across multiple projects at the same time so that I keep my perspective sharp and refreshed so that I'm not getting bored, because you will hear me say, I did this because I got bored. So I kind of developed kind of a way that I would handle Potch and which way I would try to guide him. And one, he had to learn my vocabulary. I'm a very casual person. I do not take myself seriously. I am not going to put on airs of superiority. I have a very practical approach to the way I'm discussing and use a lot of vernacular terms. So he had to understand I work in a closed environment. I have my own routines and practices and how I critique things. So he needed to understand that if I go, that sucks, that's not an insult. That is an oversimplification of a complex issue that now I'm going to detail and do it in a casual way so that it's not scary and it's not something that somebody's going to run away from. I wanted to make sure that he learned independence. And what I mean by that is, as somebody that is trying to mentor, I want to give you a bunch of information. I want to give you some guidance. I want to empower you. And then I want to leave you alone. I want you to have time to breathe and work and find your own solutions. Because, again, going back to the example of being, in a black hole for 9 years, I developed solutions and processes that worked for me and satisfied what was going on in how I process things as a designer. I wanted him to develop his own practices. And then I insisted that he multitask. So he would work on aspects of projects that I were working on for the idea of improvement, but each time we met, and initially it was always twice a week, he had to not only show the work that he was doing for me, but he had to show work that he was working on. And then we would take just as much time on that, dissecting it, going through it, talking about ways to either iterate on a concept that he's building on or try to solve what would need to be next. So ultimately, always foundry work, always personal work, all the time. All right, and that was 8 years ago. And evidently, he doesn't hate me too much. He's still hanging out. All right, so now, quickly, and then I get to let Potch talk. This is great. A couple of things. We do have a trust-based collaboration. Mm-hmm. Potch, Potch doesn't talk a lot. I got to try to get into, yeah. But we do have a trust-based collaboration. I know that if I go to Potch and I say, I need this done, I know it's going to get done. I don't say, I need this done by Tuesday. It's, I need this done. We always focus on remaining agile, and we always try to find different ways to improve what our workflows are. Sometimes, Simon, that means technology. Other times, it just means communication and how we're actually dealing with a project. Now it's always weekly video meetings. The time differences don't matter. As it is, it's 12 hours difference. So it's usually nighttime for him and morning for me. Yep. There's always a period of assessing, updating, and critiquing. So we're talking about the individual aspects of a single project that we may be working on together, or individual things that we're working on that are based on the foundry, and the goals that we have established, and go from there. We always discuss about what those next iterations are going to be, and then just commit to performing those actions. And then we drop it. And then we usually talk about other stuff. There's some gossiping. Hey, did you hear about this? And we move on. Everything is saved in the cloud. It is open to anything that's there, so he can go back and look at repositories of things that I've drawn. I will provide exemplars from old things that I both consider successful and things that I consider mistakes. There's no formality, just because our personalities are fairly easy when it comes to this. So we're not using things like Slack. We'll just text one another, and share things and then go back and forth. And you've heard me say this earlier, there are no hard deadlines, just expectations. And what I have found with that is work gets done faster because there's just an expectation. So no deadlines, yeah. And I go back to the thing that I preach, better right than rushed, which I have learned is kind of counterculture to technology. It's better done or something, I don't know. But anyway, okay. So the first major project that Potch took on where I tried to sit back and let him work was Hui. And Potch, you've got to talk now.
Okay, I have to.
The big button.
So when I was a kid, I learned to read and write through the Thai loop, which is more like a traditional form of this script. But when I grew up, I realized that Thai loop lists become more popular. There is more easy to use, and I saw it everywhere, almost every context. I know Thai loopless become more associated with the simplicity of the Latin sans serif. So it's like a perfect choice for all the contemporary branding or design. And while that time Thai loop, it's more giving more like a classic or traditional vibe. And when I have to develop some typeface, I knew for myself that I want to draw something warm, more sense of human touch. That led me to look around from the Bangkok handwritten street sign. So when I look at those street sign and letter forms again, that made me notice that this counterform in this letter, Todahan, compared with the Thai loop and handwritten and to the Thai loopless. That one in Thai loop, it's much bigger, also with the handwritten. That made me realize it's because most of the Thai letter form, they're drawn by just a single line. So when you write that, most of the letter, you don't have to lift the pen and you can finish the letter. That's a bit different from the Latin. So when I realized that, that's made me know how can I put the Thai handwritten or sense of Thai back into the Latin. And this is how the results. Mostly of the Latin just look like an upright italic. It's like from the letter K. With the italic, there's also some features that in the upright, like the tail and the knot. So for Thai, I mean, since I already brought sense of Thai to the Latin, so I know that I can have used my Latin that I designed to draw as a Thai. And when I have to produce an italic, I knew I'm gonna slant them, just totally slant them because it's already an upright italic. Even this all slanted by the same calculated angle, but in this case, the middle letter called Kho Khai, it's way off to the right. And I got help from Neil to teach me to not look in the italic with handwritten, to not look it as a whole letter form, but compare each stem like side by side. So that makes me learn that I can solve this one with just shift a little bit, and that made me find the balance of the curve, the spacing around the letter form, and that's find the right balance for the Thai italic for Hui. And this typeface got widely used from this restaurant. It's just really close by, just around the corner from this hotel. It's called Iga. And yeah, I'm glad that they got used a lot. And the food is good. You can approve that.
This is me kind of bragging on Potch. He has listened to me rant about the over-Latinization of scripts and wanting to kind of maintain character and personality. And if you remember, he showed a slide of just vernacular handwriting, and it's very satisfying to see that get captured back into the typeface that Potch produced. And that matters to me. I was like, this is what we should be doing. And yes, it really was. And this is me bragging right here. Just, it was very successful. Okay, now, on to more nerdy stuff. Clear Pro, an expansion of a typeface that I produced in 2012 called Clear Sans. Probably used most notably for Oculus branding and within the user interface. The project was initiated in September 22. Basically laid kind of the rules out of what we needed to follow. And the idea that this would be one of the larger expansions and extensions to availability in scripts, and this would be fun. That's what I kept saying. This is going to be fun. You know, it was a lot of work. But, you know, at that point, for me, you know, now, or at the time, you know, roughly 22 years into doing this, I was getting bored. And I was like, hey, let's see how much I can screw up and until we can find something that works in the idea of our workflow in producing a multiscript typeface. So ultimately, it took roughly 2 years. And I say it was completed, it's more of an air quote completed, in 2024 because we're still extending it. Currently, there's a lot of letters, a lot of glyphs, and it's growing. Outside of, you know, Cyrillic and Greek and obviously the Latin and Arabic and Hangul and Japanese, there's Thai. And we're going to concentrate on Thai because it seems to be obviously the most relevant. But for what it's worth, this was produced in-house. We did not farm it out. everything was drawn by us, which is kind of crazy. Because at the same time, we worked on another typeface that we're not talking about, that we were basically doing the same thing. Okay, so Clear Pro Ty. And this was another a perfect example of us laying out ground rules of how we were going to behave with the project, and each working on different aspects of the extension and meeting consistently on what we were producing, talking about it, and then iterating beyond that. The reason why we started the Ty, which it wasn't initially planned until much later, was I couldn't sleep. I don't sleep, period. So many times I sit at night going, I don't want to really watch anything on TV. Remember the subscriptions y'all talked about? I don't use them. So I drew, I gave my normal excuse. I text Potch, hey, I just drew the Ty for Clear. It probably sucks. Will you look at it? This is essentially what I sent over to him in 2 masters. And I kind of think I heard Potch scream around the planet. And I just was waiting until, I don't know when this was. It was maybe 3 or 4 days before our next call. So I was like, I don't know how this is going to go. Now, specifically, we're going to talk about 3 specific glyphs because it highlights how a non-Ty sees things and is emulating, and I do mean emulating. I cannot read Ty. I can read Ty a little. I do not speak Thai. I'm not going to pretend that I am a specialist. I would much rather root myself in my ignorance, accept it, and then try to learn. And in this case, definitely trying to pick Potch's brain. So give you the controller back.
So when I got this from Neil, I start with this letter. It's called Kokai. It's the first letter of Thai alphabet. I just try to improve and make things look right. Then I decide to draw something else. That's how I realized that this style kind of more close to what he's drawn in Latin. So I decide to make it more straight cut terminal, and then this way I can get more contrast to the letter form. That's also related to his Latin. So with this letter, it's also, so when I got first that the middle one, I know I have to
go back. All right, this is important to share. All right, I send this to Potch. We don't talk about it the following week after we talk about it. So 2 weeks later, Potch shows me this, and I'm like, what the hell? Why didn't I do that? How did you pick this up? Because and I don't know if you can see the subtleties with the way that we're presenting things, but there were micro adjustments on many of the characters, and all of a sudden I realized, again, it's one of these things of being able to share, looking at things from 2 different perspectives, understanding the fact that you're going to do some things that suck, but trust somebody to actually figure out how to interpret what you want. And Potch nailed it. Sorry. Okay, go on. I had to brag.
Yeah. Okay, so this middle one, that was my first move. I just tried to add more counter and top for readability. And that's how I decide again for the straight cut terminal on the right one. But then things got challenging for the lightweight, because when the stem get thinner, we got it too small for the top counter, and that affect a lot of legibility. So that's how I decide to put my iterations from the thinnest master to the medium one. So that's how I can put my final decision go on to the black weight. And that's comparison back to new first exemplar. With the last letter, Topatak, it's mostly just follow what the Kokai has and just shift the angle at the bottom to make it more like.
And then, here are all the glamour shots of the typeface, basically kind of showcasing how the Thai works with the Latin. I'm very satisfied with how this turned out, how it looks, and seeing it being used now within kind of corporate use, because that's where we've started licensing it now, and how things are being used. And we're continuing to extend it. If you have ideas to help us extend it, I'm learning now, just go let people do things. Interestingly, at the same time we were working on Clear Pro, we were also working on the extension of Aux Pro, which was probably the first very commercially successful typeface I released, I think originally in 2005. And this was the first time I considered touching it again because I thought, okay, the skill set's there to kind of extend it the way that we wanted, or the way I wanted. So we were working on these essentially concurrently. And it's always nice to kind of show this work side by side just to point out how very different something can be and still be done at the same time. So the influences weren't there. Okay, so some people probably, and I always get this at some point, they want to know where all those Instagram-worthy photos of test pages are. You know, where it looks like we're doing lots of work and making notations and planning. We don't do that. It's a waste of paper. Sorry. It's just our thing. I have found that it's better to throw the screen up. As we're talking, we're making notes. We're not making notes on printed pieces. Individually, we run our own prints so that we're testing spacing and the granularity of how a typeface is showing up. But we don't, because we work so far apart, we work a little differently. So for us, between any particular work week, from one week to the next, 20 or so exemplars may be drawn. And I use the term exemplar. I hate using the term master. Seems a little, thing. But we will draw exemplars. Those exemplars alone might effectively influence anywhere between 50 to 60 glyphs. So we know as we're talking about this set of exemplars, we know what the implication means. And then rather than go, okay, now do this, or let's do that, we go ahead and move forward with that. So those exemplars get discussed, critiqued, new solutions are considered, and then that work will be executed during the following week. There's just nothing else that needs to be discussed on that. We've developed such a routine that we know to process, repeat, and continue. Oh, and yeah, remember that. Yeah, this is the same. We're constantly working in this loop and trying to see if there's another way to improve on what we're working on before I'm willing to kind of commit to release. All right, back to typefaces. Superscript. This is a different type of approach. For those that have followed me or kind of know, I do like to draw a lot. And outside of just working with typical pencil, I have a tendency to work with pre-inked brushes. And each morning, I will do 2 or 3 pages to get my hands warmed up, especially now that I'm old. This is gray hair. I have to get the hands warmed up to where I feel comfortable. And I had a crazy hair a few years ago where I thought, hey, I'm going to try to turn this into a typeface. And this was when I was actually controlling the Positype Instagram account. Now I've grown jaded and I handed it over to somebody else. But I would work through different iterations and just post them, mostly to keep myself honest and to keep me working on this little, distraction. But as I worked, some of the commonality and some of the solutions started revealing themselves of how everything would come together. And as with most projects, I left it. I was in 2021, and it sat there for like 2 years, and I didn't touch it again. And then, okay, I couldn't sleep, and I just knocked everything out, and I sent it over to Potch. And then we then talked about it, and Potch was an ass. I thought I was done. I was like, yeah, it's got that, I knocked this out. This is great, yay. And he was like, why don't you make a thin version? I'm like, you suck. So I told him, I said, well, you can do it. And he did. And this was the first set of test exemplars sent over because for us, probably one of the biggest things to try to settle if we were going to do a lighter weight was how light we could go and be responsible. I'm very proud of the fact that I get very few support emails, like less than a dozen a year, because something doesn't work or something doesn't load. So I like to have very foolproof typefaces. So it really was a question of how far we can push this to the thin and it work. So this is kind of the first set of exemplars Potch sent over, and then we started running with it. And this just kind of gives a timeline. You can see kind of the distribution of the width of this very condensed script between November 2021 and Potch's first thin iteration in September of 23. And we just continued to push that and making it thinner and thinner, realizing in the process that for it to work, it needed to go even narrower and more condensed, and the idea of keeping it open didn't work. And the end result, it turned out great. And even though we don't talk about much, but every typeface we produce, if it's multiple weights, it is actually variable. We just don't talk about that, I guess. Anyway, we settled on 5 weights, and I think there was probably more deliberation and arguing on which weights we would release. I only wanted to do 3, and then it became 6, and then it was 4, and then it was 5, and then it was, well, shit, we got to do something, and then we settled on 5 and then released it. And it was cool. And, you know, again, we try to add as much in terms of language support and alternates and fun stuff that you'll discover as you're doing things, and it's kind of fun. Okay. Now, I saw the 5-minute thing.
I'll try to go super fast.
Okay, go super fast.
It was last year that me and my partner, we called Recent Practice, we got called up to combine with the design team for the Data Highland. Just a little bit background. The Data Highland is one of the biggest contemporary gallery museum in the Hamburg. And they came up with the idea for the show called Survival in the 21st Century. And that's how we start, because with the name of the Survival in the 21st Century, and then after the pandemic, the meaning of the survival, it's get a bit differently, more personal. And when we got combined with the design team at the Harlan, we know we had to do something different. We have to draw something that left room or open-ended for people to get involved. And our early conversation with the curator, that's helped a lot. And that's how we shaped the process. So when we keep to the 2 key ideas, the multi-dimensional and also social resilience, and that's how we have to realize that, like, how can we make the custom typeface that can work with this idea? And this is how it turned out. It's turned out to be a multi-axis wearable font that's everything can get changed, and all the design teams in the museum can also get involved and change the letter one by one. So, and we have it to be more like involved in the design system and more like a visual collaboration. So we get this letter used almost everywhere, their ticket. And also we do a sans serif. I mean, that's derived from the part of the variable font, and also backslant that used everywhere. All right, fast. And we got involved in the manual design, also with backslanted for the sans serif that we made for them. And this is, we allowed them to use longer for their project in Data Highland. And yeah, that's pretty much.
All right, my turn. Okay, quick. No, that went back too fast. Okay, so if I have been fortunate to work with some pretty fun clients, and several years ago, and if we've got time, I'll show one more custom project for the NFL National Football League in the U.S. Now I've started a process of working on typographic rebrandings for several of the teams, and one of the first ones was the New York Jets. So very quickly with that, basically we went back historically and looked at type that was being used and usually drawn by hand based off of the original exemplars they had back in the 60s and into the 70s. So
the first thing as we were talking through all of this was actually digitize the original stuff so that it was nice and crisp and we could have it by comparison. It also was a wonderful way to explain to the client the inconsistencies and the problems with the typeface just from a typographic standpoint. And this happens a lot with, athletic sports team design. They go with things that are hyper aggressive or hyper masculine in their approach, only to see that in practical application it has a tendency to fail because you can't rely on it from a marketing standpoint in setting type. So these are some of the kind of tests to show them some of the issues related to the typeface and things that needed to be done to kind of correct it. Things were way too wide in some cases, way too compressed. The angles were too disparate. Things were just not the way it was. And there was no lowercase. And the goal behind this typeface for them was not only to use it in some display things from the standpoint of their social media and within the stadium, but also to use it more practically. So obviously there was not a set of numerals. There was not a lowercase. There was obviously no there was no language support. There was no it was just a bunch of letters. So we worked not only to produce and kind of revive this typeface that they could use, but to also produce a much narrower typeface so that it could be used within social media. And then the adaptation beyond that of a sans serif that worked and picked up all of the little bits of DNA of the display typeface, but one that they could use where something that was as high contrast and as dense as they were using would show. So I think that's the last slide for that one. Yeah. Hey, I think that means we're done. Yes. Okay. I don't take myself very seriously, but I do, seriously appreciate BITS' invitation for us to come up and just kind of talk and hopefully just casually, show that we're goofballs and like to just draw stuff. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.